the outcome up to this point in time. So I think this is going live, and we'll hit record in 2 seconds. Hey Google, stop Roomba. I need to change that program.
This happened last time too.
1 second. Okay, I will go live now. And good morning at the Dutch Mentor. We have today the pleasure of having a conversation with Paula Quinsee, coming all the way from South Africa. I had the great opportunity with her to converse with her a couple of weeks ago around a highly relevant topic that I feel passionate about, which is one of the 4 pillars that I advocate for. One is, of course, mental wellness. Paula will take it away in just a couple of minutes to have a more in-depth discussion of what her work has been in that arena and how it is relevant, especially now post-pandemic. As a quick reminder, again, highly effective leadership is based on 4 pillars that we continuously need to maintain in a balance. Mental wellness, the topic today is, of course, key. Spiritual wellness, physical wellness, and relationship wellness. Only if those 4 pillars are in constant balance and rejuvenated can we become highly effective leaders and inspire others to live a fulfilled life. So on that note, Paula, welcome to the show, so to speak, and take it away. Look forward to what you can bring to the public today.
Thank you, Walter. Thanks for that warm introduction and inviting me to be here. So I am a growth mindset catalyst and a relationship expert and author and speaker. And I work primarily with individuals in their personal capacity around personal growth and development, of which mental health wellness is one and relationships is another. And then I work with organizations as well around relationships in the workplace, relationships dynamics, so relationship with self, relationship from a team perspective, relationship from an organization perspective. And what people commonly refer to as soft skills, I like to call them human skills because it's those skills that make us very human. And of course, right now with what's going on with the pandemic, mental health is key. It's very topical. But there are a lot of things that we're not necessarily talking about underneath that mental health and wellness banner. So that's what I'm going to be touching on a little bit today. So let's kind of take a step back and go to mental health and mental wellness. It's very topical at the moment. A lot of people are talking about it. But what they really actually mean is self-care routines and digital fatigue. Being online all the time, having to juggle work-life responsibilities and childcare, and not being able to put boundaries down in terms of work-life integration, so personal boundaries and work boundaries. And that's really what people are referring to when they mention or talk about mental health. They're not talking about the full spectrum of mental health. So yes, that is one component of it. You have obviously the very real and deep mental health issues, things like depression, anxiety, other sorts of instances that contribute, so substance abuse, other sorts of traumas that people have experienced that are still, haven't been resolved, or the healing process hasn't started or completed. There's very real loss at the moment, particularly obviously as a result of the pandemic. And we haven't been able to go through our traditional grieving processes to deal with those losses. But there also have been a lot of other losses that we haven't necessarily thought of or taken into account under that loss banner. For example, the very simple step or act of getting up and going somewhere, like an office, gave us a sense of purpose. It gave us an identity. And now that we're not doing that anymore, we feel lost. A lot of people are feeling lost and they're feeling unsettled. They've had to try and recreate themselves and their identity with working from home. not necessarily having the people and the interaction with people in the workplace. Even though they're having it online, it's very different to in person. And what we do know after many, many years of research is that we are wired for human connection. And human connection plays a critical role in our sense of well-being. Relationships, personal and or professional, provide a sense of support. It's a support structure. It's the people and the places that we turn to when we want to celebrate the good things in our life and our successes. It's also the people that we turn to when we're struggling and we need support. So it provides a key support structure to us. And working in the remote digital world, we've lost those little interactions that we would have in the workplace. Going to our colleague's desk, having lunch together, chatting around the coffee station or the water cooler. We've lost those little interactions and we're now having them on screen. But we're also being a lot more distracted on screen than what we were in the workplace. Yes, we had distractions in the workplace, but they were very different to what we're experiencing now. And particularly in terms of the way that we are wired, we're not wired to be online all the time, and which is why this digital fatigue thing and relationship fatigue thing is a big thing. So it's called the popcorn brain. And we've got lots of distractions happening on the screen with Zoom calls and MS Team calls and things that are going on our screens. Also the notifications that we've got popping up on our screens and or on our devices. And we've got a lot of distractions happening behind us, whether it's kids, dogs barking, whatever it might be. And this is contributing to this fatigue that we're feeling mentally and physically and emotionally, but also from a relationship fatigue thing. And when I use the word relationship, people often default to romantic relationships because we don't use this terminology in the workplace, right? So when we hear relationships, we think romantic relationships. But relationship is simply how am I relating, responding, reacting, engaging with you, the other person or persons, and the environment I find myself in. So I have a relationship with my organization, my workplace. I have a relationship with my leader or my manager, and I have a relationship with the people that I work with, and also customers and suppliers. So it's how meaningful are those interactions now that gives me a sense of feeling like I belong, feeling like I'm connected, that I'm being valued, that I'm feeling appreciated, and I'm not just getting this barrage of emails and Zoom calls that I have to attend. So what a lot of organizations have done is they've just replicated what was going on in the workspace into the online environment. We had these back-to-back meetings in the workspace, but now they've just moved online, and that's obviously counterproductive because it's contributing to all these mental health and wellness issues that we're experiencing. We didn't have time to walk between meetings, take a loo break, go and grab a coffee, because we just go from one Zoom meeting to the next. So there's a lot of research now that's coming out around the impact of COVID and the real losses that we're experiencing from a COVID point of view. But some of the things that we're not talking about under that mental health and wellness banner is particularly when it comes to men's health, because men have been conditioned not to show emotion. It's a sign of weakness. And from a very young age, men have been conditioned to be tough, to be a man or man up, or don't be weak. And so hence it's harder for them to reach out and ask for help. And also men don't necessarily associate some of the physical challenges or the illnesses that is playing out for them. They don't necessarily identify and link it to mental health challenges. They think of it in the physical sense. So for example, I've had very bad indigestion for the last couple of days. Maybe it was something I ate or something else that's going on. I've taken Rennies or whatever it might be, but it hasn't helped. Not necessarily thinking it could be related to stress and what is causing the stress. So we've seen some of the statistics, particularly here in South Africa where I am, that 1 in 4 men are susceptible to committing suicide, which is higher than women, because they don't talk about it, because of the stigma associated with putting your hand up and asking for help. Whereas women are more open to that because we've always spoken about how we felt, whether it's been with our girlfriends, our sisters, our mothers, our best friends, whoever it might be. and we're more susceptible to going for therapy. And again, there's a negative stigma attached to therapy, that you have to have serious issues to be in therapy, right? And then secondary to that, which is a big thing that a lot of companies are now starting to become aware of, is gender-based violence. The impact of COVID on couples and relationships and family dynamics has spiked globally. We first saw the divorce rates spiking in China because they were one of the first countries to come out of lockdown. And being confined in that close space for long periods of time is what has contributed to the divorce rate. Those relationships that were rocky to begin with probably didn't survive, or they are on breaking point and they're just being patched together in different ways. Those relationships that were very strong and healthy have been challenged as well, and couples have found themselves on certain days questioning and doubting, and even some days thinking, I want out of here, because we're not used to being confined into each other's space 24/7. And so we've also realized that a lot of employees are not safe working from home because they're in a toxic environment. And so now from an organization point of view, from a compliance and a legislation point of view, so here in South Africa, and I know you have something similar over there, we call it the Occupational Health and Safety Act. And that stipulates that employers have to provide a safe working environment for employees. Now, if you as an employer are enforcing a work from home policy because of COVID, where does that role and responsibility lie? Is it with the employer or is it with the employee who happens to be in a toxic environment? And what support structures are you now putting in place under your employee wellness banners and your employee wellness initiatives that you are putting out there? Now, some of the organizations that we've worked with on the extreme, we've had those that have gone, we don't want to touch that Pandora's box, so we will deal with incidences as they arise. We don't want to talk about it, we don't want to rock the boat. On the other side, we've had organizations that have been very proactive and have implemented some amazing support structures for employees because they really are invested in their employees' well-being and they want to be seen as an employer of choice. So they've gone to great lengths to implement this, but also from a training and development perspective in terms of raising the awareness around gender-based violence. Now, again, when it comes to gender-based violence, we default to thinking about male on female abuse and physical and sexual abuse. We don't think about the full spectrum of gender-based violence. So female on male abuse, because it does happen. There is the whole LGBTQI spectrum that happens within. There's also child abuse with children being at home now in terms of homeschooling. And then there's also human trafficking, which falls under the gender-based violence global banner.
Yeah, Paula, let me just step in here. I'm so intrigued by this piece of the topic for the simple reason, I think I mentioned that a couple of weeks ago. I have not read enough about this here in the United States. And you know, South Africa is no different than the United States. We battle these same things. And I think that the stigma around this is so strong that people, you know, people tend to not talk about this often enough. I think there's a duty and a responsibility both on the employer and employee side to make this a big, you know, to talk about this openly and do it often. If I have not seen it on the street as a paramedic or as an administrator in healthcare, it does not mean it does not exist, right? If it's an underlying tone, we need to bring it to the foreground and have that open dialogue around that. So I think, you know, our OSHA or certainly, you know, our HR leaders should take this really serious and have this open dialogue and investigate how serious this is. I know that you have recovered, thank God, from COVID yourself, and you look fantastic. You know, it is still, even though we all are now acting like we're back to normal, there is now a new phenomenon called a hybrid workplace, where people are really adapting to a new normal. I think there is some real upside to that, is that, you know, the efficiency of working from home is certainly good. Going back to the office and reintroducing our need for human interaction is fantastic. Do you see anything in that space of in hybrid? What we need to add to the education awareness in order to make sure that we come out of this and establish new normals while safeguarding the people who are in these types of positions, either at home, fully remote, or in hybrid?
Definitely. And a lot of organizations are grappling with which hybrid model are they going to be implementing going forward. But the stats are showing that 65% of employees are wanting to continue working from home and have some form of hybrid approach. So for us, it's a three-pronged approach. The one is it starts in our homes. We need to start having these conversations in terms of how we raise our boy children and our girl children as to what is and is not acceptable behavior, to start changing the narrative and the story as opposed to the repetitive behavior and repetitive patterns. We need to have the conversations in our communities, so home being one of it, but then our immediate communities, our friends and our families, because we don't have these conversations with our friends and families. Mm-hmm. We don't voice our views and opinions and where we stand on these kind of topics because they are considered taboo topics. And within the communities that surround us, places like churches, other forums and associations and clubs that we belong to. Then it also needs to happen in the business world. And yes, it needs to be a collective approach with HR, with employee well-being and wellness, with the legal team and the leadership team as to the corporate culture and what those policies are in terms of either zero tolerance and what that looks like and what the repercussions are going to be should this happen. And also the support structures that we're going to put in place to support our staff should they be in this kind of situation. But also how are we going to train and raise the awareness under this full banner and not just focus on this component, because GBVH is more than that. And we also don't talk about the other forms of abuse that happens, which is harder to prove because there's less physical evidence. So the mental, emotional, verbal, and financial abuse that happens. Mm-hmm. And that is harder to detect, but it has as equally important impact on our mental wellness. So we can't be talking mental health and wellness in the workplace if we are not including this under that banner. Because if someone is in an abusive environment, they are not going to be mentally, emotionally well, and they are not going to be able to be productive and operate and bring their best self to the workplace. And then the third aspect is from a national or a government perspective in terms of access to support structures outside of the business environment. So, for example, health and safety services, policing and security services, free therapy or free counseling or places of safety and shelter, and raising the awareness around where and how people can access these resources. So just like now, how we speak about COVID as an everyday conversation. Are you masking? Are you sanitizing? Are you social distancing or physical distancing? We should be able to have the same conversations around this topic because it has a mortality rate affected by this, just as COVID does. Yeah. It should be an equally important topic. And from a global point of view, just like globally, we are tapping into different countries around how they are approaching COVID and how they're addressing it and what safety measures they've put in place and what's working and what's not working. We should be doing this from a global perspective as well, because GBVH is a global pandemic.
Yeah, no, I cannot agree with you more. And I think it requires local championship by the local Department of Health directors to bring this to the foreground, to make this a comfortable part of the conversation. Yeah, as I'm sitting here, I'm almost thinking about, in healthcare, when we do depression screening, it's almost a thought that that our HR department should do some level of depression screening with their employees, especially who work remote or in hybrid functions, to get a sense of under the cloak of confidentiality, that people are able to speak up and say, how am I truly feeling, right? It is that, and people do hide behind it. Obviously, the financial abuses and all the things you talk about, these are outward, already symptoms of an underlying disease, which often is depression or other, suppressed mental wellness, mental illnesses that were otherwise well maintained because of social interaction are now coming to the foreground itself. Yeah, I think it is certainly I will do my piece by obviously we're doing our interview today. I'll post it wide, and I will have a conversation with my local government agency to see if they would be interested in bringing this topic to the foreground, and maybe even do like a PSA, right? Like any grassroots effort, it needs to start somewhere. And up to this point in time, I've really not seen any of it, and which I find to be, I'm disappointed by it, and at the same time, I hope it is not too late for some people, because I'm sure that the suicide rates, as we have predicted early on, will start climbing, right? It's both the financial recovery and the mental wellness recovery is really, really exceptionally important. Is there anything else that you think that from a coaching perspective, that if I'm listening to this as a leader of 1, 2, or 10, what can I do as a leader to lead a conversation with my team that might be working remote? If I can depend on my HR, because obviously not all HR departments are equal.
Definitely, and this is where we're seeing the need for new leadership skills and leaders to approach things differently in a virtual world. And look out for the red flags. There are some obvious ones and there are some not so obvious ones. So the obvious ones would be when you see a change in behavior of your people that you know well, and you're going, something doesn't feel right here. This person that was so proactive and engaged and contributing has all of a sudden become very quiet, very withdrawn, and doesn't necessarily engage anymore or is as outspoken as before. How do I tap in there and find out what's going on? Is it something personal, or is it something that's going on in the workplace? And how do I provide support? So key to this, and it's also very topical at the moment, is what people are referring to in the workplace as psychological safety or emotional safety. How do we create those environments in a virtual world to where there's trust, and the culture is a speak up culture versus a shut up culture, and that it's safe for me to speak up. So we need to make an environment where it's safe to put my hand up and say, I'm not coming into work today, I'm sick. But it's also okay for me to put up my hand and say, I'm not coming into work today because I'm sad. And what's causing my sadness, and that falls under the mental health banner. So what we've done as an example with one of the organizations that we've worked with here is they wanted to provide as many options as possible for their employees to get help. So they implemented internal support structures through their employee wellness initiatives. They also, through their training and awareness, made people aware of the external sources that they could tap into, because there is a very big fear and stigma attached to an abusive environment, and the shame and the embarrassment that goes with that. And there's a fear that if I speak to someone in the workplace, it's not going to be confidential. I'm going to have a target on my back, and or it's going to be a career limiting move because people are going to think that I'm not able to cope. And so they had already implemented wellness ambassadors within the workplace, which was more around the lifestyle health, eating healthy, movement, taking time off from digital devices, that kind of thing. So lifestyle wellness. So we just built on that, and we trained them up in terms of GBV ambassadors, and trained them up in basic support skills as a place and person of safety, that when someone was experiencing a situation, they knew that they could tap into this person, and this person would take them and help them get access to the resources that they needed. So if it was an emergency situation, they would tap into the safety and security and get that person removed to a place of safety and shelter. Or if they needed counseling, they would get them access to the counseling services that they needed. And so it wasn't where you got help from, it was the fact that you got help, internally or externally. So you're going to need to provide as many options as possible that people, whichever one I feel comfortable with, I know I can get help, and it's okay.
Yeah. So again, that's the message to the leaders of people, is to not wait for others to come and do it for you. Take the bull by the horn, make it a topic of conversation, expose it, work with your employee assistance programs in order to lead the conversation, to complete the assessments. And I think the last question I would have is that now we're going to the individual level. So even if somebody who's been in a hybrid or in a full-time position, working from home, I agree that I've always been an opponent to back-to-back meetings, and I don't believe in 60-minute meetings. I believe in 30-minute meetings. no different than this interview. We said, the guide is 30 to 45 minutes max, is because the attention span of the adult doesn't reach much beyond 20 minutes. So whatever we do after 20 minutes is really not that relevant, because people will forget about it. But what would you recommend to the individual who's managing a calendar or setting themselves up for availability for meetings to make it successful? And I'm alluding to, should it be a 30-minute meeting with a 10-minute break to go outside, get some fresh air, do some exercise, and come back? What is your thought process on how the individual can best manage this and therefore managing their mental wellness?
So there's two schools of thought out there that I've come across, but I like your idea as well about the 30 minutes. The one was a report and research that was done by Microsoft, and they recommended 90-20. 90 minutes online, not necessarily online as in meetings, but working online. And then 20-minute break in between that you could go for a walk, you could move, you could go outside, you could have a comfort break, whatever it might be. The other train of thought that I've recently come across is around 45-minute meetings and a 15-minute break between each meeting. So to actually chunk your diary out, 90-20 or 45 minutes, 15 minutes, or the 30 minutes, depending on what works for you, and because everybody operates differently.
Yeah.
If you're really engrossed in something and you're really analytical and you're working on something, 30 minutes might just interrupt your thought patterns and your analytical process. So you've got to go what works for you. And the corporate culture and leaders need to endorse that environment and that behavior and make it okay for employees to put boundaries down. At the same time, from an individual perspective, and this is going to be a key thing for companies going forwards in terms of attracting talent, but also retaining talent, is how serious are you about my mental health and well-being? And what structures have you put in place to show me how serious you are about it? Because going forward, we've realized the kind of lifestyle that we want and that we can work from anywhere. And we want to work for companies that see that and value that and actually encourage it. And then from a leadership point of view, and links back to your previous question around what do we look out for, whether it's GBVH, whether it's mental health and wellness, is really being intentional about checking in with your individuals on an individual level, but also from a team perspective. And checking in terms of not the sort of customary, how are you doing? It's how are you feeling today? Or what challenges are you facing today? Or how are things how are things at home? To get a real sense check of where they are. And also, some people may be too shy to speak up. So make use of anonymous polls or checklists or climate surveys or quizzes or whatever it might be to get a sense of what's really going on underneath the surface.
Yeah, so I think the key message and takeaway is really you have to take action. Right? It is that by listening to these talks and not doing something about it, again, there's a missed opportunity, and sadly, this will end up reading on Facebook that somebody else passed away due to suicide, only to go back and look at their pages, and they've been screaming at us that something is not well. And we've seen it too often, and again, this is an opportunity for us to intervene. And again, suicide is the end result, the poorest of the results. Obviously, all of the abuses of financial, sexual, whatever may be the case, are all lasting. It will have a lasting impact on both the victim, for sure, as well as the abuser, right? It is PTSD, it becomes a real issue. So again, one part of our leadership academy and the things that we try to teach is really to be responsible as a leader. And I think you laid it out very nicely on all the different things that a leader can do and should be responsible for. Again, I'll summarize it in my 4 areas of focus. Listen, we have to love those we lead. And loving is not just by complimenting them or awarding them. It is really genuinely caring for them and getting to understand how they are, and not just asking the one question, but follow up with a few more questions to see if they're truly in the right place. And if they're not, we have to take action on that. So that requires superior listening skills in order to extract that information. And again, everybody is a little different, right? There's no one way of doing it. When we work with our teams, we need to lead through context and not control. So when we bring this topic to them, make sure that you give it color and bring context to it for people to understand. Those who are in danger tend to want to crawl up into a ball like a turtle, go back into the shell rather than to come out. Right? We have to stick with them and come back to it a few times in order to get them comfortable And that's really the third place, that psychological and physical safety, that it is okay to speak up and to make sure that there's no repercussion to whatever they are feeling due to circumstances beyond their control maybe. And then the last is to work with great focus. So the working in a smarter environment. And I say 30 minutes because if 30 minutes become 45 minutes, that's perfectly fine. But if you say 60 minutes, for some reason, people want to burn that 60 minutes, and now an hour is gone, and the next meeting is already starting. So that's how I try to prevent people from overlapping in meetings. Paula, you've been absolutely fantastic. I'll give you the last couple of minutes, a closing argument, closing statement, and I think you're doing a world of service by bringing this topic up and coming all the way from South Africa, and I look forward to staying in touch with you.
Thank you, Wolf. Yeah, I think, right now people are talking about the fourth industrial revolution, but we've actually long passed that. We've moved out of that, and we've been in the fifth industrial revolution, which is all around the people aspect. That was missing from the fourth industrial revolution, which is all about AI and robotics. And we're now seeing the people component, even more so now with lockdown and COVID. And that the requirement is around creativity, meaning, and purpose. And people want to feel like they belong. They want to feel like they are safe on different levels. So financial, job security, but also mental, emotional security and safety. They want to feel like they're valued and they're cared for and they're appreciated and their contribution is being appreciated. And if they get a sense of that, they will show up in a way that is adding value to the organization as opposed to being disengaged and not contributing to the organization, which, as we know, hits the bottom line of an organization. And right now, we can't afford that with what's happened due to COVID and where businesses and economies are. We need all hands on deck.
Yeah, I think that the ultimate measure on the business side of the house is always productivity. And I'm completely and totally convinced that if you have a highly engaged workforce, and that requires that mental, physical, relationship, and spiritual balance, you'll get your productivity you're looking for. Falls short in any one of these four pillars, and your productivity suffers because of it. Paula, have a wonderful day. I know it's already afternoon in your neck of the woods. We just got out of breakfast over here. Look forward to chatting again in the future. You're doing fantastic work, very important work, and it's been an absolute pleasure spending some time with you this morning.
Thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure.